Welcome to One Wrong Move, where one small decision set the whole chain in motion. Today's story starts with one hydrologist who warned that a dam would fail and end somewhere nobody saw coming. Central China. 1 in the morning. August 8, 1975. A wall of water up to 10 meters high is moving across the Jumadian plain at 50 kilometers an hour. In its path is a town of 9,600 people, still asleep. One man had told them this dam would fail. They'd labeled him an enemy of the state and sent him into exile years before. The day after the wave, they sent a car to bring him back. This is the deadliest dam failure in history. And for 30 years, the Chinese government told the world it was a fraction of its real size. The Huai River runs across central China between the Yellow River and the Yangtze. For most of recorded history, it was one of the most violent rivers in the world. It flooded almost every summer. When the typhoons came in from the Pacific, the Huai would rise, burst its banks, and drown whole counties. Any government that couldn't control the Huai lost its credibility in Henan. That's been true for 1,000 years. In 1950, Mao's new government announced a campaign called Harness the Huai River. The plan was to build dams, a lot of dams, across every tributary, on every bend, wherever a reservoir could sit. 3 of them were supposed to be the spine of the system: Banqiao, Shimantan, Baisha. The engineers building them had almost no experience. Modern hydrology in China was 10 years old. The Soviets sent advisors to help with the designs. The Chinese workers did the construction, mostly by hand. Banqiao was finished in 1953, 118 meters across the river. Behind it was a reservoir of 492 million cubic meters of water. 2 years later, the Soviets came back. They were worried about the original design. Between 1955 and 56, they supervised a reinforcement. They widened the structure and added material to the core. When it was done, the workers gave it a nickname. They called it the Iron Dam. It was rated to survive what the engineers called a once-in-a-thousand-years flood. What that meant in practical terms was 300 millimeters of rain in a day. A dam that could handle that much rain was, to the people who built it, unbreakable. It was the flagship of the Harness the Huai project. It was a symbol of what the new China could do. And from the day it was finished, one man was telling them it was going to fail. His name was Chen Xing. He was the chief hydrologist on the project. Chen Xing had looked at the Huai River Valley, the soil and the drainage, and he didn't like any of it. His argument was simple. The designers were obsessed with retaining water. They weren't thinking enough about letting it out. He wanted more sluice gates. He wanted better drainage channels. He wanted the dams rated for storms worse than anything the region had ever seen. He also warned about something else. Standing water would leach salts up through the ground and ruin the farmland around the dam. He was right about that too. By the late 1950s, Henan farmland around the reservoirs was already showing salt damage. But the part of his warning that mattered most was the part about the gates. He kept saying it. On a storm bigger than design, you need to be able to let the water out faster than it comes in. If you can't, the water rises. The dam fails, and there's nothing anybody downstream can do about it. Everyone who built Banqiao heard him say this. Nobody wanted to hear it. In the late 1950s, the Communist Party started a campaign called the Anti-Rightist Movement. The idea was to root out intellectuals and technocrats who were criticizing the direction of the country. Teachers, engineers, writers, scientists. Hundreds of thousands of people were labeled rightists. Some were sent to labor camps, some to the countryside. Some were reassigned to posts where they couldn't do any harm. Chen Xing, who kept telling the project leaders that Banqiao would fail, was an obvious target. He was labeled a rightist and an opportunist. He was removed from his position on the Huai River project. He was reassigned to Xinyang, a couple of 100 kilometers away from the dam he'd helped design. He wasn't the only technical voice silenced. The great leap forward was starting. The Cultural Revolution was coming. The people who knew how the system actually worked were being pushed to the edges of it. By 1975, the flood control infrastructure in Henan had been degraded by 20 years of political chaos. And the man who'd told them it was going to fail was 200 kilometers away, reading reports about somebody else's reservoir. This is the kind of story one wrong move exists for. If you've never heard the name Banqiao before tonight, you're not alone. Subscribe and stay with me. On August 3, 1975, a tropical storm came out of the Pacific and made landfall in Fujian province. Its name was Typhoon Nina. It wasn't unusual. Fujian gets a dozen of these every summer. The forecasts agreed on what would happen next. Nina would hit the mountains in the interior and dissipate. The leftover rain would move north into Anhui and fade out over a couple of days. That isn't what happened. What was left of the typhoon collided with a cold front moving south out of Mongolia. And when a warm, wet air mass meets a cold front, the moisture drops straight out of the sky. The collision happened directly over the Huai River Valley in southern Henan, over Zhoumadian Prefecture, over Banqiao. On August 4th and 5th, the rain started to fall. It didn't stop. At first, it looked like a normal heavy rain. By the end of the first day, the gauges at Keshan County were showing numbers the local officials had never seen before. The forecast had called for about 100 millimeters. 4 inches. A heavy soaking. By the end of the second day, the storm had already delivered 8 times that. In 24 hours near the center of the storm, over a meter of rain fell. More than 1,000 millimeters. The storm dropped more rain in a single day than Henan normally gets in an entire year. At Keshan County, the 3-day total was 1,100 millimeters. Nobody had ever recorded a number like it in that part of China. The first readings were so far outside the forecast that local officials assumed the instruments were broken. They weren't. The designers of Banqiao had rated the dam for 300 millimeters in a day. The storm was delivering more than 3 times that. Britannica later called it a flood, twice the size of the 1-in-1,000-year event the dam was built to survive. On the evening of August 7th, the water behind Banqiao Dam was already above its design level. The spillways were open. They weren't enough. The inflow was outrunning the outflow by a factor of almost 6 to 1. At 9:30 that night, a People's Liberation Army unit stationed near the dam sent up the first formal warning. PLA Unit 34-450. The message was direct. The Banqiao Reservoir was going to overtop. If nothing changed, the dam would fail before morning. The warning went up the chain of command. It took hours to get to anyone who could make a decision. Somewhere in that chain, a request was made. Open the sluice gates. All of them. Release the pressure. Dump the reservoir into the river downstream and accept whatever damage that caused. The request was denied. The reason was straightforward on its face. If they opened the gates, the sudden flood would drown the towns along the Ru River downstream. People would die. So they held. They waited to see if the rain would break. They hoped the dam would hold through the night. The rain didn't break. The water kept rising. Around midnight, the decision was reversed. Open the gates. Release whatever the dam could release. Save the structure. And that's when they discovered the problem Chen Xing had been warning about for 20 years. The sluice gates would not open. Sediment had been building up behind the dam for 2 decades. Silt, sand, debris from the watershed. The gates were physically blocked. The mechanisms that were supposed to release the pressure were buried in mud. The engineers who designed the dam had assumed the silt would be managed. In practice, nobody had managed it properly for years. This was the exact failure mode Chen Xing had written about. Not the rain, not the storm, the gates. He'd said, on a storm bigger than design, you need to be able to let the water out faster than it comes in. The project leaders had said he was an opportunist and sent him to Xinjiang. Now, at midnight on August 7, 1975, the project leaders were trying to open gates that were buried in silt, and they couldn't. The man who'd told them this would happen was 200 kilometers away. The water behind Banqiao kept rising. At some point in the last hour of August 7th, it reached the crest. It started to pour over the top of the dam itself. A dam is not designed to be overtopped. The water carves into the crest. It scours the downstream face. It finds a weak spot and it opens it. At about 1 in the morning on August 8th, Banqiao broke. It didn't crack gradually, it failed catastrophically. Over the next 6 hours, 701 million cubic meters of water passed through the breach. The peak outflow was 78,000 cubic meters per second. The peak inflow was 13,000. The dam was releasing water almost 6 times faster than the storm was delivering it. All of that water hit the valley below in the middle of the night. The wave that came out of the breach was, by most descriptions, up to 10 meters high. It was about 10 kilometers across. It was moving at roughly 50 kilometers an hour, about 30 miles an hour. It was a wall of water as tall as a 3-story building, as wide as a small city, moving faster than most people can run. It was moving through farmland at 1 in the morning. Nobody saw it coming. Most people in its path were asleep when it arrived. The corridor it carved out was 55 kilometers long and 15 kilometers wide. About 30 kilometers downstream from the dam was a small town called Dawencheng. It had 9,600 residents. According to Britannica, the wave reached Dawencheng within minutes of the collapse. All 9,600 people in the town were killed. The buildings, the roads, the fields around the town, everything went under at the same time. There was no warning and no escape route. Dawencheng is the kind of place that almost never gets named in disaster histories. It was a small county town in a part of China that foreign reporters weren't allowed into. It's the kind of place that can be erased in a sentence. Banqiao was not the only dam in the Huai watershed that night. Upstream on the Hong River, Shimantan Dam had already failed before Banqiao went. Shimantan was the first to break that night. After Banqiao, the wave moved downstream and hit the next dam, and the next one. In the hours that followed, more than 60 dams in the Y system collapsed in a cascade. Each failure added more water to the flood. Each failure widened the corridor of destruction. The Jingguang Railway, the main line between Beijing and Guangzhou, was cut for 48 days. More than 100 kilometers of track washed out. 7 county seats were inundated. When the sun came up on August 8th, about 10 million people were affected by the flood. About 12,000 square kilometers were underwater. Between 5 and 7 million houses had collapsed, and the water wasn't going anywhere. The drainage was gone. The canals were gone. The railway was gone. By the middle of August, more than 1 million people were still trapped in the flood zone without clean water or food. The diseases started a few days later. Dysentery first, then typhoid, then hepatitis, then malaria. In Runan County alone, 320,000 of the 500,000 residents caught something. The Chinese army deployed more than 40,000 troops for the relief operation. It wasn't enough. The flood zone was too big, and the transport was cut. People who had survived the wave died from the water that was left behind. For decades, the official Chinese figure for deaths from the Banqiao collapse was 26,000. That number only counted people killed in the flood itself. Drowned, crushed, swept away in the first hours. It did not count the deaths from the epidemics that followed. It did not count the deaths from famine as the food supply collapsed across the affected counties. When international sources began looking at the numbers years later, they added those in. Britannica estimates the total at more than 220,000. Other later reports went higher. But the records stayed muddy, and the people controlling them had every reason to keep them that way. 26,000, more than 220,000. The gap is the story. This is the part of the story most people have never heard. If you're still with me, the next few minutes are why this video exists. Subscribe before we go into the silence. For about 12 years after the collapse, the Chinese government said almost nothing about Banqiao. Inside China, the official figure held 26,000 dead, flood damage, relief operation, end of story. Outside China, almost nobody knew it had happened at all. In 1987, a journalist at the Henan Daily named Yu Weimin wrote a book about the disaster. It was the first serious public account from inside China. Even then, the book circulated carefully. In 1995, a Chinese news agency ran the first full report, 20 years after the dam broke. In 2005, the government declassified the internal documents. Outside China, that was when Banqiao finally started entering broader disaster histories. For 30 years, the deadliest dam failure in history had been a secret. On the day after the collapse, somebody in the chain of command remembered Chen Xing. They sent a car to Xinyang. The man who'd been labeled a rightist and removed from the project was brought back to help clear the river channels. He'd been right. About the retention, about the drainage, about the silt in the gates, about all of it. They'd called him an enemy of the state for saying it. Now they needed him to clean up the consequences of not listening. Banqiao Dam was rebuilt. The new version was completed in 1993. Shimantan, upstream, was rebuilt and completed in 1996. They built the new dams on the same rivers, in roughly the same places, holding back roughly the same water. The second iron dam is still there today. One engineer warned them. One campaign labeled him an enemy. One reassignment took him away from the dam. One typhoon the forecasts got wrong. One storm that delivered 10 times the rain anyone expected. One warning at 9:30 at night. One request to open the gates. One refusal. One reversal. One trap of silt that wouldn't move. One wave up to 10 meters high, about 10 kilometers across, 50 kilometers an hour. One town of 9,600 people. One number the government told the world. One number it didn't. One wrong move. One engineer told them the truth. They labeled him an enemy and sent him away. The day after the dam broke, they had to bring him back from exile to clear the bodies from the river. If this one got you, hit subscribe. One wrong move drops a new one twice a week, and the next one is worse.